You ever think a Wendigo stumbles upon a bear watching a group of hikers in the woods and asks, "Are you gonna eat that?" And the bear just sort of raises one big bear eyebrow and walks away? Sorry, I'm having too many shower thoughts today. Maybe I should just turn the shower off. I've been in here for 3 hours and I still stink. Hey, welcome back, friends. I've got an assortment of scary and true work-related stories for you about kidnappers, murderers, and an epic collection of scary stories from a park guide who has witnessed horror and the unexplained. Before we begin, be sure to follow and review Tales from the Break Room on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and send us your scary work stories at eeriecast.com/submit. Check out and pre-order my upcoming book, Creepy Campfire Stories, at creepycampfirestories.com. It's a beautiful hardcover book filled with terrifying stories that are allegedly true and are perfect reading around your next campfire. Thank you. Now then, these are Tales from the Break Room. My Stories as a Park Guide. From Reagan Knows It. I've been a wilderness guide at one of America's state parks for almost a decade. I'm not going to name which one, partly because I still work there and I like this job, but also because management has made it abundantly clear they do not appreciate staff sharing certain experiences that may affect tourism. What I'm about to share with you happened over the course of my employment, and while I can't prove everything, I've tried to record the events as accurately as my memory allows. Most days are perfectly normal. I lead hiking groups, point out native plants, explain conservation efforts, and answer questions about wildlife. The park sees thousands of visitors annually, and 99% of the time, everything goes exactly as planned. It's that other 1% that keeps me awake on some nights. I'll call the first story The Observer. This incident began about 4 years into my employment. I was leading an early morning bird-watching hike when I noticed him, a tall, rail-thin man standing just off the trail. He was not dressed like our typical visitors. While most people wore appropriate hiking gear, he had on a button-up shirt, slacks, and dress shoes that looked decades out of style. Not exactly wilderness attire. He wasn't even part of my group, but I nodded politely as we passed. He didn't acknowledge me, just stood perfectly still, watching us through thick glasses. I thought it was odd, but I figured he was just socially awkward and continued the tour. Over the next few weeks, I kept seeing the man, always alone, always in similar outdated clothing regardless of weather, and always watching. Not the scenery, though. He was watching the people. He carried a small notebook and would write in it whenever visitors or staff did anything, however mundane. After the third sighting, I mentioned him to my supervisor. I'll just call him Dave. "Oh, you mean the accountant," Dave said with a shrug. "He's harmless. Been coming here for years." "The accountant?" I asked. "That's what we call him. Nobody knows his real name. He never causes trouble so far, so management leaves him alone." That might have been the end of it, but a month later, I was leading a geology walk when I spotted him again. This time he was methodically photographing our park vehicles in the staff parking lot. Something about his systematic approach really bothered me. During my lunch break, I decided to approach him. As I got closer, I noticed he was mapping out something in his notebook. It appeared to be the staff parking area, with license plate numbers carefully documented. "Excuse me, sir, can I help you with something?" I asked. He looked up, his expression unnervingly blank. "I'm cataloging," he said, voice flat. "Cataloging what exactly?" "Patterns, personnel movements, access points." He flipped through his notebook, showing pages of staff names, arrival times, and vehicle information. My name was in there, with surprising details about my schedule. "Why are you tracking park employees?" I asked, trying to hide my unease. "This isn't the only location," he replied, ignoring my question. "There are 17 others, all connected. Do you have special permissions?" "What? I don't understand what you mean," I said. "For the restricted areas, the non-public sections." He leaned in closer. "Have you seen anything unusual during your employment?" I radioed security, but by the time they arrived, the man had walked away. I filed a report, but management didn't seem particularly concerned. They confirmed he had been visiting regularly for at least 15 years, yet somehow we had no actual ID of him on file. The observer disappeared for about 6 months after that. When he returned, something was different. His hair color had changed slightly, wore different glasses, but his mannerisms and clothing style remained identical. It was as if someone had created a slightly updated version of him. He still visits occasionally. Other staff have reported him asking similar questions about restricted areas and special permissions. Management never removes him from the premises, despite some visitor complaints about his staring. Sometimes I wonder if they know exactly who he is, and that frightens me more than the man himself. The next story I'm going to share with you I'll call the Creek Crawler. This one is harder to rationalize away. It started with rumors among the seasonal guides about something living in the Northern Creek system. Most dismissed it as the usual campfire tales used to spook newbies. But there was some consistency in the reports that made me curious. Indigenous legends of the area mentioned a skin thief, or hollow man that hunted near the water, though most anthropologists classify these as cautionary tales to keep children away from dangerous waterways. Last August, we received warning of a severe thunderstorm system approaching the park. Standard procedure is to evacuate all backcountry campsites. I was assigned to check a remote site near the Northern Creek, the same area featured in those legends. I reached the campsite around 4 p.m., with the storm front visible on the horizon. The site was abandoned, but in a concerning way. The tent was torn up, not collapsed. Personal belongings were scattered, like someone had left in a hurry, or rather a panic. But there was no blood, no obvious signs of an animal attack. Just the unsettling sense that something had gone very wrong. I radioed it in. I was told to return immediately, due to the encroaching storm. The fastest route back was the Creek Trail, which follows the water for about 3 miles before connecting to the main path. With darkness falling early due to the storm clouds, visibility was poor. About a mile in, I heard splashing in the creek that did not match the pattern of flowing water. Initially, I assumed it was wildlife. We've got otters and beavers and deer, but the splashing seemed to be following my movements. When I stopped, it would stop too, and when I began to walk again, it came with me. I quickened my pace, thoroughly convinced it was just my nerves and the approaching storm playing tricks on my hearing. That's when I caught movement in my peripheral vision. There was definitely something pacing me in the creek bed. In the dim light, I could only make out a vague shape, but it appeared to be moving on all fours, in this awkward, unnatural manner. It was roughly human-sized, but moved with a jerky, crawling motion. No normal person would move that way. I told myself it must be a bear, though the movement pattern was still wrong. The trail eventually crossed the creek via a small footbridge. As I hurried across, I felt something reach up from below and grab hold of my ankle, with enough force to leave a bruise. I fell hard, dropping my flashlight, which rolled away and illuminated something pulling itself up onto the bridge. What I saw in that brief moment will haunt me for the rest of my days. It had a humanoid shape, but with these long and lanky limbs. The skin was pale but appeared waterlogged, with patches missing to reveal something dark underneath. The face was horrible, almost human but distorted, with wide eyes that reflected light like an animal's would. I kicked free and scrambled backward, grabbing my hiking pole. The creature lunged at me, and I thrust the pole at it in defense. The metal tip connected with what I think was its shoulder, causing it to emit a high-pitched keening sound that did not sound human nor animal. There was a burst of lightning, and when I looked again, the creature was gone. I ran the rest of the way back without stopping once. I reported the incident immediately, showing the dark, viscous fluid on my hiking pole and the bruises forming on my ankle. Management took the pole, documented my injuries, and placed me on paid leave for 2 weeks, officially listing it as trauma following hazardous weather conditions. When I came back to work, my pole had been replaced with a new one, and no matter what I did, they would not let me have the old one back. I was informed that my report had been filed as possible wildlife encounter, species undetermined. My requests to see the analysis of the substance in the pole were denied. Later, I learned through another guide that over the last 10 years, hikers have gone missing in that same creek area. All cases classified as presumed wilderness misadventure, and these cases had no bodies recovered. The creek section has since been closed for environmental restoration, whatever that means, and no staff are assigned there alone. I have refused all assignments in that area of the park, and management has not pushed the issue, which tells me they definitely know more than they're letting on. I'll call this next incident the White Pines Trail phenomenon. It took place during my 5th year at the park. We have a trail that's pretty famous, but I'm just going to call it White Pines Loop. It's about 4 miles of moderate hiking through one of the oldest sections of forest. This trail isn't particularly remarkable except for one strange pattern I noticed after reviewing incident reports during a safety training session. Over a span of several years, various hikers had reported a nearly identical experience. They'd somehow lost their hiking companion on the trail, despite never separating. In each case, the missing person was eventually found waiting at the trailhead, insisting they'd been there for hours after getting separated from their group. Each missing person reported feeling suddenly disoriented before finding themselves back at the trailhead. Management dismissed these as simple navigational confusion, but the similarity of the reports caught my attention. All of these incidents I read about occurred along the same half-mile stretch of trail, all between 3 o'clock and 4:30 p.m., and all during the month of October, strangely enough. So when October came around that year, I volunteered to lead as many White Pines tours as possible. I wanted to observe this stretch of trail myself. For 3 weeks, nothing unusual happened. Then on the 27th, while leading a group of 5 hikers, I got my chance. We reached the infamous section around 3:15. I was hyper-aware of my surroundings and kept counting my group over and over to be sure. The area looked fine, nothing crazy, nothing odd at all. As we rounded a bend in the trail, I did another head count. 4 hikers. Someone had gone missing. A middle-aged man I'll call Paul. He had been hiking with his wife, but he had vanished. His wife Linda was understandably concerned. "He was right beside me just a minute ago," she insisted. I was telling him about the bird we saw, and when I turned to point, he was just gone." We backtracked about 50 yards. No side trails, no steep drops, nothing that could explain a sudden disappearance. So I radioed it in. We conducted a brief search of the immediate area while waiting for the backup ranger. "Did you hear anything unusual before you noticed Paul was missing?" I asked his wife. "No, nothing. But right before I noticed, I felt strange. My ears popped, and for a second everything went quiet. I thought it was just altitude or pressure." That detail wasn't in any of the reports I'd read. When the backup arrived, I was instructed to continue the hike with the remaining guests, while they conducted a more thorough search. Standard procedure would have been to evacuate everyone, so this instruction surprised me. It seemed to me that they expected Paul to turn up at the trailhead. Sure enough, when we completed the loop an hour later, there was Paul, sitting on a bench by the trailhead map. He looked unharmed, but bewildered. A park ranger was already with him, taking notes. I approached them as my group reunited with Paul, amid relieved hugs and questions. "I don't understand what happened," Paul explained. "One minute I was walking next to my wife, the next I felt dizzy. Everything went quiet, and suddenly I was standing at the start of the trail. According to my watch, that was over 2 hours ago." I checked my watch against his. Mine showed 4:45 p.m., but his had stopped at 3:17 p.m. The ranger interviewing Paul looked up at me with a warning expression. "Thanks for bringing the rest of the group back safely. I'll handle the report on this one." Later that evening, I attempted to access the incident report, but found it had been classified as a medical event, and the rest of it was restricted. When I asked my supervisor about it, he became uncharacteristically stern. "We're not going to discuss that. If it's about the White Pines, I don't want to hear it." I pressed him for more info, and the most I got from him was that some places are just weird. My final story is called The Double Hiker. It's perhaps the strangest of them all, as it defies any rational explanation I've been able to come up with. Last spring, I was leading a small group of 8 hikers on our Ridgeline Trail, a moderate 6-mile loop with spectacular valley views. Among them was a middle-aged woman named Karen, wearing distinctive bright yellow hiking pants and a blue windbreaker. About 2 miles in, we stopped at a small waterfall for photos and a water break. I did a quick head count. Only 7 people. Karen was missing, but no one had seen her turn back. Just as I was about to radio for assistance, another guide called in to say that Karen was actually at the main Vista Point. That was confusing for me. The Vista Point was still over a mile ahead. There were no shortcuts or alternate routes. I assumed there must be another woman with similar clothing, so we continued our hike. When we made it to the Vista Point maybe 40 minutes later, there was Karen, taking photos of the valley. I approached her, asking if she'd somehow gone ahead of the group. "No, I've been with everyone the whole time," she insisted, looking confused by my question. I didn't push it then, figuring I may have miscounted earlier. We completed the loop and returned to the visitor center at approximately 2:30 p.m. I was filling out my tour report when, to my shock, Karen walked through the front entrance at 2:50, still wearing the same distinctive yellow pants and blue jacket. This second Karen approached me, apologizing for falling behind the group. She claimed she had stopped to photograph a bird and lost sight of us, eventually finding her way back to the center on her own. I was stunned. I checked my photos from the tour, I found images of Karen at the waterfall rest stop, and separate images of her already at the Vista Point when our group arrived. In one group photo taken by another hiker, she appears in the background at the Vista Point overlook, while simultaneously being captured in the foreground with our group. I discreetly showed these photos to Karen, expecting her to have some explanation, maybe a twin or a relative of some sort. The color drained from her face as she stared at the images. That's not possible," she whispered. I could see her hands shaking as she held my camera. "I was never at the overlook ahead of the group. That's me, definitely me, with the same clothes, the same everything, but it's not me. I don't remember making that pose or being there alone." When we checked the visitor center security footage, it clearly showed Karen entering with our group at 2:30, with no prior entry that day. Yet, my time-stamped photos showed her at the Vista Point well before our group arrived. As Karen reviewed her own camera, her distress grew. "These aren't my photos," she said, scrolling through images of trail sections we hadn't visited, rock formations not on our route. I didn't take these. I've never seen these places." Park administration intervened quickly, taking Karen to a private office and dismissing the tour group with complimentary passes. I was ordered to complete my report without mentioning the incident and to delete any photos I'd taken. I've never seen Karen again, but occasionally I receive visitor evaluation forms where the guests reference events or conversations from my tours that I have no memory of conducting, despite being logged as the guide of record. The Wicked Well, from Oliver D. My name is Oliver. I'm 24 years old and I work at an antique store downtown. Although I've seen some very interesting items pass through the store over the years, normally my days were quiet and, for a lack of better words, boring. We would sometimes get furniture that's older than me. One day while working my shift, I was sweeping the floors and trying to get my closing duties done, as it had been slow due to a thunderstorm, and the boss said when I'd completed the closing list I could close up and go home. I was heading to the back to put the broom up and grab the mop when I heard the doorbells jingle. Walking back to the front near the counter, I didn't see anyone. "Hello?" I called, after feeling this odd chill run down my spine. That's when I saw it. Leaning against the wall was a beautiful painting. The painting was of a wishing well in the middle of a wooded area during the fall. I was in love with this painting at first glance, but could not understand where it had come from or who had painted it, because, to my surprise, there was no signature on it. I immediately called my boss, asking him if he knew of anyone coming by to drop off a painting. He had no clue what I was talking about, and said that he would take a look at it in the morning. I closed up shop and started the 10-minute walk home to my apartment. I thought about that painting the entire way. I didn't think about the odd situation of it just appearing there. I was instead focused on how badly I wanted the painting for myself. It was like craving a cigarette, and it was the strangest attachment I'd ever felt to an object before. That night, I was in bed, picturing which wall in my house I could hang the painting on, and how I could spend my time in the comfort of my home just admiring it. The next day, I felt an urgency to get to work, to make sure that nothing bad had happened to the painting. So I quickly walked to work, not even having my morning cup of coffee. Upon arriving at work, I was greeted by my boss saying good morning. I asked him if he had seen the painting yet, and he told me yeah, that it was strange because he also had no clue where it came from. I then asked, "So, what do you think it's worth?" With a chuckle, my boss looked at me and replied, "Why? You interested?" I nodded my head, patiently waiting for a real answer. "Considering there's no artist signature, and we don't know how old or where it came from, consider it yours," he said. I thanked him repeatedly, filled with excitement and now the sudden urge to just grab the painting and run home so I could get it on the wall. But I couldn't do that. I still had a full workday ahead of me, and that day seemed to drag on all day. I would occasionally glance at the painting. Each time it became harder to look away from. I was just so ready to get back home. Closing up the shop at the end of the day, I walked home feeling pure bliss, knowing the next 2 days off I'd be able to hang up my painting where I wanted it and enjoy it. I decided to hang it on the wall of my living room, a wall I could see from my bedroom. My apartment was pretty small, so lying in my bed, I could still see the painting. Once I got the painting hung up, I sat down in my chair and turned on the TV. I had a drink or two so I could relax. Before long, I was feeling my eyes getting heavy. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper. It sounded like a woman's voice. I got up and looked around the room, searching for the source of these whispers, when my eyes fell on the painting. I was taken aback. I stood up and got closer to the painting. As I did, I saw a woman in a white dress sitting on the edge of the well in the illustration. I felt my pulse quicken. No way, I thought. The woman was whispering. The drawing of a woman was whispering, but I could not make out what she was saying. I leaned closer to have a listen, and she walked toward me, still whispering. In the blink of an eye, the woman grabbed me by my collar and started to pull me. I braced both of my hands on the wall and pushed back with all of my might, panicking and struggling to break free from her grasp. At the last possible moment, I woke up. I was in my chair, accompanied by the sound of a low mumbling coming from the TV. In total shock, I rushed over to the painting to find it free of anything or anyone out of the ordinary. My mind felt a bit fuzzy, but I chalked that up to the whiskey and being half asleep. I made my way to the bathroom to brush my teeth before getting in bed, when, in the mirror, my reflection revealed something to me that was utterly terrifying. The right side of my shirt collar was torn. I felt chills go down my entire body. I convinced myself I just needed more sleep. I went to bed after closing the door so I couldn't see the painting. At some point, I awoke to silence. I rolled out of bed and walked into my living room to check on the painting when I noticed something I hadn't seen last night. The background around the wishing well. It changed from fall to a sort of winter. Colorful leaves no longer filled the trees around the well, but instead, there were naked limbs and branches reaching across the canvas like hands trying to grab at me. Worst of all, I constantly had the urge to be near that painting. No matter what I did or where I went, I kept thinking about it. The next 2 days were normal as it gets. Monday rolled around and I found myself extremely bored at work, so I decided to use my work laptop to do a little research on the painting as I was constantly thinking about it. I searched for hours, even doing a Google picture search, and I found absolutely nothing. So I came to the conclusion that the painting must have been done by someone nearby, a talented local. I spent the weeks that followed obsessed with finding out where the painting came from exactly, and what had inspired it. Was this a local well? All the while, I was having extremely vivid dreams about the woman in white. My constant urge to be close to the painting was met with extreme fear of being anywhere near it. This went on for quite some time until one day, I decided to check out the local museum for answers. Asking one of the older gentlemen that worked there for some assistance, I showed him a picture of the painting and asked him if he had ever seen anything like the well locally. "Ah, that's the Wicked Well," he said abruptly. "Follow me." Without a word, I followed him around the corner to a glass casing, holding some older photographs and newspaper clippings. And there it was, in black and white, a photo of the well surrounded by trees. One of the articles was titled, "The Wicked Well," with a story of a woman and her 4 children whose remains were found inside the well. The paper was dated October 20th, 1932, and the article also stated that the woman and her children had been missing prior to being found for a little over a year. Hearing the man explain the articles to me, telling me about how not many people had ever really asked about the well, unsettled me. He then showed me a photograph of the woman, and my stomach turned. There she was in a white dress, the same woman that grabbed me by my collar and tried to pull me into the painting. I asked the man if he knew the location of the well, and he told me that after the remains were found, the well was soon after sealed off, and any trace of it would have been covered by many years of foliage by now. Puzzled, my walk home was a blur, and all I could think of was how. How could any of this be happening to me? When I got home, I thought I'd try to experiment a little by sitting down in my chair and having myself a drink. I needed to experience it again. It was like I was addicted to being around the painting, no matter how uneasy it made me feel. After about 3 drinks and scrolling through my phone a bit, my eyes started to feel heavy again, and I once again began to hear a whisper. I glanced at the painting, starting to feel myself drawn towards it. I got up and approached the painting cautiously, but the whispering started to get quieter the closer I got to the painting. Looking at the well, the lady in white was not there. I leaned in closer and suddenly felt 2 ice-cold hands on the top of my back. I turned, and the lady in white was standing there, behind me, pushing me towards the painting as I screamed. I fought as hard as I could, but in vain, as she pushed me inside the painting. My ears rang and I was disoriented. I stumbled toward the well, dizzy, looking for something to grab a hold of to keep my balance. I saw it then. Etched into one of the stones of the well was my name. I ran my fingers over the etching, and suddenly I woke back up in my chair, covered in sweat. I got up and quickly locked myself in my room, putting as much distance between me and the painting as I possibly could. The next day, I took the painting behind my apartment complex and burned it. It felt like relief and a sense of grief at the same time, watching it burn. I never had another experience like that in my apartment, but I also now don't keep paintings in my place. Every once in a while, though, I have nightmares about my experiences. I still wonder, why me? What was the motivation of that lady in white? And who did the painting belong to before me? These are things I'll never get an answer to. Flames We Conquer, from Burn Bright. I started as a firefighter back in the good year of 1992. It was a long process with hours upon hours of training. A fresh memorial had been erected during my training for one of our senior firefighters who had perished in the line of duty. Apparently, he had gotten trapped in a burning home after getting some children out, and they found his remains hours after the fire had finally been put out. It had been discovered there had been accelerants in the blaze, and a stove eye left on. The subsequent fire was brutal and killed 3 in total: the parents and Mr. Arlek, the firefighter who fought to save those kids. I wasn't quite sure how to pay respects to the brave man I hadn't known personally, so I just laid fresh flowers every month on his memorial and remembered him as what the ultimate price could be and what saving lives could risk. I watched the children grow up as I was in the service. They grew up quickly under the care of their aunt, and they became very skilled teenagers who had been on the honor roll several times by now. Mr. Arlek would have been proud of the lives he saved. In the blink of an eye, it was 1999. I had begun training new recruits myself, showing them the now aged memorial of Mr. Arlek, telling them of his bravery and the lives he saved in spite of his own. Every year, this left new trainees in awe and a somber respect, and several have taken to my tradition of flowers. I had begun to take more serious fires on in that summer, and I had 13 calls in the span of a month. There was a drought, a thing most firefighters fear. During a drought, even the grass becomes more like a matchbox, ready to ignite. We saw a local farm go up in smoke, leading to the barn igniting. I remember hearing painful squeals of various animals. I wanted to retch. We managed to put the fire out, but by then all the animals inside had died, and the farmer was heartbroken as he witnessed the absolute devastation of his animals and crop. It was an unusual summer that year. Over time, the fire seemed targeted. We were extremely unsure of what or who could be doing these works of devastation, but it was clear that something was at work. 14 large farms, 2 family homes, and a local pub on the outskirts of town had fallen victim to these hungry flames. I was left like the other firefighters with speculations of who could be doing these fires. Was it just some crazy person who wanted to watch the world burn? A person thriving on the chaos and adoring the shell-shocked look of families? There's very little that escaped our notice when we owned into the cases, reviewing them with the police for signs of arson. Everything looked mildly normal, minus a few issues such as the out-of-place gas tank, a motorcycle too close to a wall left running, things like that. It seemed like stuff that could have been by accident. But with all these accidents, it sure seemed more like something deliberate going on. The police began to patrol areas more often. I would see a police officer almost every half hour, which was kind of unnerving, a frequent reminder that something was afoot. It was between these patrols one night where things seemed off. I was sitting in the firehouse doing some maintenance on the fire trucks when something felt weird. I had this urge to check around the fire station just in case, but when I did, I didn't find anything out of place. Wish I could say I was relieved after that, but I'd be lying. I was nervous. Years of training was saying something was definitely wrong here, but I couldn't be sure of what it was. I kind of had this feeling like static in the air. The hairs on my arms were standing on end, and I felt chills rippling through me. I decided to look around outside the station, but once again, I found nothing. I was beginning to think I was being paranoid. I began to work back on the fire trucks, polishing the outside hoses. As I started to fill the tank with water, I then noticed something flickering from the corner of my eye. A candle? Honestly, it wouldn't have shocked me if someone had lit a candle to make the station smell better, but the flame moved out of sight then, and that's when the alarm bells rang. I went to the windows, trying to peer at whatever was going on, only to see the flame dance around the building. So I panicked, thinking that someone was about to set the fire station itself on fire. I yanked open the door, chasing after the flame, but I didn't see anyone, just a flickering light. For a moment it stood still, and I saw something new emerge from the flame. And I swear to you, it morphed into a person's outline standing beside the memorial. I was terrified, not really understanding what I was looking at. But the horror slowly melted away. I don't know why, but things felt calm, relaxing even, like everything was gonna be okay. The person-shaped flame seemed to raise up what appeared to be an arm, like a salute, and instinctively I returned the gesture. The figure seemed to shrink away then disappeared. When I came in the next day, I told the chief about what I saw. Then he explained to me how a serial arsonist had been captured trying to set fire to the local library. I was shocked, and I thought then that maybe that was Mr. Arlek leaving a sign to let us know that everything was going to be okay. Always be aware. From Venus at 1014. I've been holding on to this story for quite a long time, mostly due to not realizing the gravity of the situation until I was 22 or even 23 years old. This happened back when I was 14, in 9th grade. I was walking home from some volunteer work, minding my own business. It was a nice summer evening with a warm breeze. I was only about 3 blocks from my home. I remember everything clearly. I was right by a KFC on a main busy street. A truck pulled up on the side of the curb then. Inside was a man I'd never seen before, possibly in his late 30s or early 40s. He proceeded to ask if I wanted a ride. I told him, "No, thank you." He then told me he was the uncle of this loser I was dating at the time, and called him by name. He insisted again. "Come on, I'll give you a ride." He smiled lightly. He might have said other things, but I don't recall them right now. I, being very naive, said, "Okay." This was where I changed my mind in an instant. I had my hand on the door handle, already pulling it open. I then saw this man getting way too excited about me getting in his vehicle, as if he was shocked I'd said yes. I know, not smart. I'm aware of that now. He started to drop everything he had on his passenger seat to the car floor. Just junk, what seemed to be baby toys and sheets of paper. I remember looking forward to the street ahead of me. The sun was setting as I thought about this man's behavior. It was a beautiful evening, so I then just told him, "You know what? I'll just walk home. Thanks." Then I began to walk away. The guy looked so confused, but he said nothing and sped away. I went on with my daily routines, thinking nothing of it. I can't remember how much time went by. I want to say a weekend. As we were having lunch at school the next time we hung out, it was my sister, a girlfriend, and the loser boyfriend. I brought the event up calmly as I didn't see it as a big deal. The conversation went as follows. I said, "Hey, your uncle offered me a ride the other day." The loser said, "What uncle?" I replied, "I don't know, some guy who said he was your uncle, I guess." I described the man in the car then. The loser replied, "I don't know who that is." "Okay," I replied, "whatever. I don't know who that was, but they said they knew who you were, even said your name." The look on his face completely changed. All the color drained from it, a mixture of shock and fear and realization about something, but nothing was said. After that, no one ever brought it up. I never thought about it again until I began to listen to scary stories and realized what had happened to me was not nothing, but something terrifying. As I found out later, the loser had enemies who truly hated him and were gang affiliated. My conclusion with this situation was that the man who tried to give me a ride was a family member of said enemy, trying to get revenge with people who were in his close circle. As I was his girlfriend at the time, I was a perfect target. It was terrifying when I put the pieces together, almost a decade later, thinking about what could have happened to me. I truly believe I might not be here right now. I'm grateful for the 1 second that I saw that desperate behavior and was mindful enough to pick up what was happening. I'm 29 years old now, happily married, and have 2 great boys in my life. Thank you for listening. I hope my story reaches many ears. Be safe out there. Predators are always present. The Compost Heap. From Bianca/Amanda. I'm a 17-year-old girl who recently got a job doing yard work for an old woman who we'll call Carly for the sake of privacy. I'll give you some backstory so you can understand easier. I got the job a few months ago so I could earn some extra cash. I wanted to go to a concert on the other side of my country. I had another job as well at the time, but I didn't get enough from it to save up in time. When I first arrived at the house, it looked very overgrown and empty, so I thought I had the wrong address. Carly, my new boss and the owner of the house, appeared as I started to recheck the address. She asked if I was Bianca, and I said yes. She showed me around her house. It was a little unsettling, to be honest. It looked as if no one had lived there for decades. She said she had been away for a few months and the people who were house-sitting for her did not respect the place. For the next few weeks, I was just tidying up the area and weeding. She had mentioned wanting more people to come and work for her. That's how my friend Amanda started working there. There was another kid who joined around the same time as Amanda. His name was David. This was his first job, and he was 13. A week leading up to the incident, I had noticed that David had not shown up for work. Amanda and I just thought he quit, or maybe he got fired, because Carly seemed to always complain about him, his laziness and his unreliability, and how he lost all her tools. She'd even accused him of stealing a hand shovel at one point. On the day of the incident, Amanda and I were weeding the front together. We don't usually work in the same area or together much, so it was nice to chat and work with each other. We had been working for a few hours before we started to weed the front, so it was already pretty warm when we began. We had started talking about our school subjects and upcoming tests and assessments when we got onto the topic of David. "So, do you know what happened to David? I haven't seen him for a while," I stated as I was putting the weeds into a bucket. "Nah, I was gonna ask you about him. You think he quit?" Amanda replied. Before I could respond, Carly seemed to just appear in front of us with an agitated look on her face. "He left, okay? Now stop talking about that boy. He was the worst worker and he never listened." She hissed out that last part before she turned and walked away. I could hear her mumbling as she walked to the back. Amanda and I were a little shaken up by the encounter. We exchanged a look of curiosity and unease. After that, we just continued weeding the front in silence. An hour later, we had filled 7 buckets of weeds, and we carried them to the back with the help of a wheelbarrow. Once we got to the back, Carly told us to tip the weeds onto the compost heap and just pile dirt on top. She also told us not to dig into the weeds that were already there, just to pile it up on top. I was a bit confused because she would normally tell us to even out the weeds before putting the dirt on top. Another thing to note before I continue is that Amanda and I had not done weeding for 2 weeks, so the weeds that were on the heap already would be pretty much gone by now. We got to the heap and were stunned to see a big pile in the middle of the compost. We shrugged and just dumped the weeds onto the already big heap. We then noticed a really strong smell of her weed tea. It's a liquid made from weeds and fish oil and water that's left out for a long time. It was really strong and putrid. It seemed to have a slight undertone of dead animal too. I chalked it up to the liquid. As we started to shovel dirt on top of the weeds, I suddenly got the urge to see what the big heap was hiding. It's not like Carly to not want the heap flattened out if she wasn't hiding something. I started to dig a little hole with my hands, an action I soon regretted. My fingers brushed something cold and stiff. I recoiled my hand pretty quick and peeped into the hole I made. I gasped, loud enough to get Amanda's attention. She came over and looked down at the hole. She put her hand to her mouth to stop herself from screaming. Her face had gone pale. I could feel the blood draining from my own face, too. It was around 11 a.m., meaning we only had around 1 hour left. "We can't let her know we know. We have to act normal," I whispered to Amanda. She agreed. The rest of the time was a blur as we tried to act normal and just finish our work. I could feel eyes burning into the back of my neck, but I kept acting as if nothing happened. Finally, my alarm went off, telling me we had 5 minutes to pack up. I told Amanda, and we quickly packed everything we needed up. We were walking down the driveway. I turned to wave goodbye like normal, but changed my mind as I saw Carly just standing there staring at us. She had this cold look in her eyes. We walked away. As soon as we were out of view from the house, Amanda and I started to run all the way back home. I kept looking over my shoulder as if someone was following us. As soon as we got back to my house, we called the cops. I told the operator everything I saw through frantic breaths. We later found out that when the police got to her place, it was empty, and no one had lived there for a year. Which meant Carly was a squatter. They also found David, dead and buried under all those weeds. He had been there for 8 days, and we couldn't smell his decomposing body because of the weed tea that was put there on purpose. Amanda and I have moved away from that area. Even though it's been a while since the incident, I can't help feel like Carly is still out there, watching. A horrid visit. From Mischief Managed. That day was rather boring in several ways, many of which I couldn't even bother to list. But the day had been absolutely dead. I had been playing with these small stress toys I keep on my desk, scrolling through Facebook, catching glimpses of cute animals and the occasional minion. It was a struggle not to roll my eyes, honestly. It seemed nothing was going on absolutely anywhere. I was a solid 3 hours into my shift, feeling the familiar tug of spacing out creeping into my mind. I let that feeling wash over me, resting my chin on my palm. Not sure how long I was like that for, nor can I recall what the daydream was, but apparently it had been all-consuming. I glanced at my clock, trying to force my blurry eyes to focus on the analog face staring back at me. 3 hours and 15 minutes into my shift. Time was just flying. I laughed at the sarcasm of the thought and started to shuffle around papers that had already been sorted half a dozen times by then. We had no appointments today, but had to stay open in case a walk-in came in. Really, I don't know if I regretted applying to be a dentistry receptionist, or if I was just that bored. Did I mention I was bored? I walked around my small booth, organizing things that didn't need it. Anything to keep me busy. I had Mr. Creeps going on a podcast. As my thoughts drifted back to my job, I frowned as I noticed someone in the lobby. Odd, though, the bell had not chimed its usual melodic tune. I was puzzled, but greeted them anyway. It was a short and pale man, maybe 50 years old or so. He was clean-shaven and had a small hunch forming on his back. His eyes were clear and full of wit, which made me smile. I'd always loved this sort of customer. Their banter was usually the best. "Hello, please sign in at the kiosk, please. If you don't have an appointment, I'll need your ID and insurance card." My usual greeting speech. I'm not sure why, but when the man spoke, the excitement evaporated, leaving a pit in my stomach too. His voice was even but dripped with something resembling malice, but far more primal. "Sure, but there's something I need from you first." I stared for a long moment before gathering my courage. "What can I do for you?" "Where's your bathroom?" His question spun me for a loop, not being at all what I imagined he'd ask for. I was expecting him to ask for the soul of my firstborn or something. Sure, it's down the hall, second on the left." He nodded and thanked me. I watched as he left, feeling absolutely puzzled about what that natural fear response had even been about. I felt a bit dazed as I sat back down, and I waited. When the man never came back, I assumed he had left when I was staring at my phone. The day continued into the late evening. The dentist had left, and I had a while longer to put in the client data that needed updating and filing. I hadn't even given second thought to the silence, as I had been after hours many times and found it the most relaxing part of my day. There was no one to bug me and nothing that needed my attention, other than the bit of paperwork that needed to be digitized. I was elbows deep into a stack of 50 patients, nearly cursing that I hadn't done this earlier, while I had more time on my hands, when I noticed something. A door cracking open. I figured it was the dentist who maybe forgot something in his office, so I didn't give it much thought. I began to piece together x-rays on one patient's file. I didn't really pay that much attention when the office door closed, nor when a shorter person emerged and sat in a chair on the far end of the lobby, in a spot almost imperceptible from where I sat. I don't know when I noticed it, but something shifting in that direction made me look, and I was a bit in shock seeing the small man who I remembered had asked to use our restroom. "Excuse me, we're closed now. We'll reopen in the morning. I'll have to ask you to leave." He made no move to leave, but instead walked toward the front of my desk in quick, long strides, which I was left confused over, but refused to acknowledge. He stood in front of me, whispering something I could barely hear. Stupidly, I leaned over, wondering what he was saying. He whispered a bit louder, and I still could not hear him. So I tilted my head. "You really need to leave before I call the authorities." He then grabbed me by the hair, forcefully tugging me across the desk. "I asked when you get off." His voice was calm, and that frightened me. I pleaded for him to let me go. I could feel my scalp burning from the force of his pull, as if it might rip from my head at any moment. He smiled a grin so wide even that hurt to look at. He then slammed my head down on the solid wooden desk, and lights burst in my vision with sparks of pain. I let out what was a scream but sounded more like a yelp when he slammed my head back. I could feel blood pouring from my mouth where teeth had been cracked and knocked out. I bit my tongue at one point and swore a tooth shard had been lodged in it. I was so scared, crying and begging as the man slammed me down one more time before gathering the teeth while I sat there stunned and crying. "Believe in the tooth fairy now, do you?" he said. I was left in pain and absolute confusion as he fled the office with a good majority of my teeth. I went to the hospital later and filed a police report, but they assumed I'd hit my head too hard in a fight or in an accident and laughed at me. They told me they would investigate, but to look out for some money under my pillow. If you have a job working in the woods, don't fool yourself into thinking it's a dream job. Because when the hikers start going missing, and something starts taking people into the creek, you're gonna wish you were at home playing RuneScape instead. Good night. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Tales from the Break Room. I'm your host, Darkness Prevails, and you can find me on X at Dark Prevails. Help us grow by reviewing and following Tales from the Break Room on Apple and Spotify. Send us your scary work stories at eeriecast.com/submit, and pre-order my awesome new upcoming Creepy Campfire Stories book on Amazon, or just go to creepycampfirestories.com. Comes out July 8th. Until next time, everyone, I've got to clock out. Corporate says if I put in any more overtime, I'm going to start having to pay rent. But whether I'm clocked in or out, they don't know that I'm still in the walls. See you next time.